Hey everybody, what's going on? It is James here, and I wanted to shoot a fast video because it's been a long time. So, going to make this one all about Bitcoin, not even trading specifically, just Bitcoin. So, first things first, this is our Bitcoin market cycle chart that I've been talking about now for a number of years. And when I look at this chart, to me, it currently still looks like it's in the optimism phase. We can see that it tends to be pretty choppy through here. And then typically what happens during a market cycle is the last couple of months is where most of the gains actually happen, or at least the biggest rapid portion of the gains. And not percentage wise so much because, going from 100,000 to $200,000 Bitcoin is only double. But as far as just overall dollar for dollar growth, so, going up very, very quickly and doubling in a short amount of time is very, very cliche for the thrill and euphoria phase of a market cycle. So, all of this so far is lining up with our 4-year, cycles that I used to be a big um, cynic when it came to that stuff. But I really believe that those cycles probably do have some root in reality just because the way the halving affects the supply with Bitcoin. It automatically creates um, a FOMO phase, if you will. People know that supply is going to be getting smaller, and so it does drive, a cycle or a type of manic phase. So when we look at this, I still believe that barring some sort of, meltdown in the overall stock market, Bitcoin probably is following its cycle. It probably is nearing the end of the optimism phase, and we're probably going to see a pretty rapid growth in Bitcoin price over the next couple of months. And I'm going to give some predictions. These predictions are purely for fun. They're not financial advice. I've had a pretty good history with predictions, but in some ways, I think about that and I'm like, well, I've been more right more often than most people, so I'm probably due to be wrong and probably due to be wrong in a big way. So take this with a grain of salt. But when I see this and when I see everything playing out the way it currently is, I tend to believe that Bitcoin's probably going to top somewhere around 175 to 200,000 tops, 173 specifically, but somewhere in that ballpark. And I think it's probably going to top there sometime around November of 2025. That's what I currently believe. As far as, again, looking at this chart, like I said, I believe that we probably are entering the end of the optimism phase and starting, we should be going into belief if this plays out. It's been very accurate. Again, this was a chart that I first posted up back in November of 2021. So at this point, we're almost 4 years, which sounds insane to say that out loud. 4 years we've been following this chart. Okay. If I jump over to a US dollar chart, what we're going to see is this is a monthly chart. I'm going to put it on 3 months. And I'm going to walk you through why I believe what I believe. Okay. So essentially, when I look at this from a log chart standpoint, what I believe is that this cycle is likely to top out. Oops. Got to go to the right market cycle. Hello. These cycles tend to top around their 1.618, general areas. So these numbers that I'm giving you, they're not random numbers. They're actually based on technical analysis. And the 1.618 this time around happens to be around 173,000. Now, is it going to be perfect? Is it, guaranteed? Of course not. Never is. But historically speaking, Bitcoin has, liked those levels. And again, not exact, right? Look at this one here. It blew right through it. Actually went closer to the 2.618. But if we go back to the last market cycle, of course, we did see it talk right at the 1.618. And I think if anything, as these cycles progress and the price climbs, we do see diminishing returns. And so it may be that it doesn't even go as high as the 1.618. It may be that it actually fails to even get that high. But that's kind of what I'm thinking. And then just going off of traditional technical analysis, if we look at this and say, well, in the cycle, the way I look at it is almost like all of this is one macro cycle going all the way back to the birth of Bitcoin. Like all this is a macro cycle. I tend to believe that the stock market itself is overheated. And so if we do see a crash in the stock market, I think it's entirely possible that, Bitcoin fares even worse than what I'm anticipating. But just looking at this overall, I don't think it's far-fetched. Like, let's just draw this up here and we'll put it on We'll smush our scale down here. We'll change this. We'll say that it tops around 173. All big what ifs, right? And then let's say that this behaves like a typical cycle where it simply retraces back down to its 80% level, which, now that I'm looking at this, why am I using the wrong points of connection? I do not know. This would be our level here. This would be our low. And then we're going to go up to 173. And if I look at that, that gives me a drop down around, the 80% drop, not 80% from the top, dollar-wise, but 80% retracement will put us down around 25 to 30,000. I tend to think it's probably going to be a little bit less steep if it does have a typical bear market. I actually think probably more like 35 to 45,000 would be a more realistic drop for it. That's kind of my gut feeling on it. I'll go to a monthly chart here. But it could drop further, right? It could be that it goes even further. But I tend to think that through these zones here, if we were to have a bear market, and again, it tops and pulls back and all these sorts of things, I think we'll find that there's going to be liquidity that kind of lives through these zones all through this area. So somewhere around that 35, maybe down into 25,000 ballpark would make sense to me for a new market low. Now, some people are going to make the argument, and it's a valid argument, that this time there's a lot more institutional money involved. And so they may say, hey, it's probably not going to go as low. If you look at historical facts here, there's some evidence to support that. If you look at the last market cycle, there was more institutions than ever before. And instead of pulling all the way back and having like an 83% drop like previous cycles, we actually only got about a 75% drop from the all-time high. And again, this is not a retracement, but an actual drop. We got about 77.5%. So, let's say this does go up to 173-ish. And say we got another 75% drop. That would put it down around like 42,000. Okay. Typically in the past, we'd see Bitcoin fall like 80 to 85%. Of course, if it did that, then it would put it down around 30,000. But maybe this time it doesn't even fall quite that low. Maybe you only get like a 50% drop even. I think that's probably far-fetched. I think it's going to fall more than that if it falls. But in that case, it would put it down around 85 to 90,000 if it tops at 173. A lot of what ifs in this video. Right. That's why this is just a funsies video. It's not a financial advice or, hey, go out and make a decision on this. Just a funsies. That's all it is. Okay. Lots of what ifs. And it's more one of those videos. It's fun to do. And then if it happens, I get to come back in the future and be like, look how smart I am. And if it doesn't happen, nobody's going to be mad at me because they're like, oh, it's almost impossible to predict the future. So it's a win-win for me. Right. But, that being said, of course, I do take it seriously, and I do try to put some thought and an actual analysis into it. And yes, I do make my own personal decisions based off some of these thought processes. So that's kind of what I'm looking at there. And again, if I put this on a regular non-log chart, which is not normally how I look at long-term stuff, but in this case, just kind of playing around with this. If I do draw this up and say, hey, from that bottom in 2022, if this thing tops at 173, then an 80% retracement, which would be like a hockey stick retracement, would be down around 47,000. And if I view this whole thing as one big macro cycle, which I know it's getting kind of squirrely here, but let's just say that I view this whole thing as a macro cycle all the way back here. Put this back on a regular chart, and then we can see, smush my scale down here. Then at 8%, again, it's going to put it down around that $34,600 level. Okay, so that's kind of how I like to do my analysis. It's what's worked well for me in the past, is trying to find levels that work from different angles, different timelines, log plus regular. And that's, served me well in the past. I haven't been perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but, I have had some pretty solid calls. And those calls actually started a lot earlier than some people realize. For example, in December of 2017, I made my first call and got just ran through the mud for it, which really sucks in hindsight because I got ran through the mud so much I took it down. I was embarrassed. Like, oh, I'm such an idiot. I can't believe I said that the top was in. But the top was in, right? So I should not have taken that video down. I posted it December 7th, 2017, saying that I thought, we were topping. And then, of course, we topped 10 days later. And then 2018, during the summer here in August, I was saying, hey, look, Bitcoin's down 68%. So at that time it was around $7,000. And most of the gurus were saying that the bottom was in, we've been going sideways. And I was saying, I don't think so. I think we're going to fall further. I even said I got money waiting for the 80% plus levels. Well, it fell 83%, exactly like I predicted. And down here, it's funny because even, barely a year into my trading journey, here I was talking about $350,000 Bitcoin, and I still think it's possible long term. I just don't think it gets there this specific cycle. And I'm not sure it ever gets there, honestly. But I wouldn't write it off. I know a couple of years ago, I did not think it would happen. I was completely like, that's never happening. But the institutional adoption has been far greater than what I anticipated. And of course, now even governments are starting to adopt it. So, I think the sky's the limit for this. But, we look at that and then we can go look at some of the posts that I made on, social media about, calling in 2019, calling for the $35 to $4,500 lows, calling for the, $55 to $75,000 highs before 2022. And then of course in November 2022, saying I thought it was going to fall to 8 to 12,000. There was even a video where I said it might only fall to 16,000, which is exactly what it did. So like I do have a history of kind of digging through the noise, and usually I have a pretty good feel for it. And then what happens is after I make the predictions, I start second guessing it, which is, unfortunately why I didn't make tens of millions of dollars like I really should have off of Bitcoin in the last 8 years. But, it is what it is. This time around, this is what I'm thinking. I'm thinking, we're probably going to pop. Like I said, I could see it going as high as 173,000. That's kind of my ballpark that I have in mind. And then I do think it will fall potentially as low as 30 to 35,000. And that's without a horrific bear market in stocks. Not the stock market melts down. I think we could see a very different scenario on Bitcoin. I know some people think that money will flow to Bitcoin. I think it will actually flow away from it. I think it will be a risk on asset. And like most risk on assets, I believe Bitcoin will fare very poorly in a true global bear market. And if that were to happen, and this is a big what if, I don't think it would be absurd to see Bitcoin retest the 2018 lows under $5,000, which I know some people think is impossible. But if you look at it from a drop level, it's about 97%. And companies like Amazon, for example, fell 99% in the dot-com bubble. So a lot of people feel like, well, it can't fall that much because it would die. That's not the case at all. If it fell that much, what would actually happen is most retail would be washed out. And if Bitcoin survived, which I think it would, if Bitcoin survived, it would be institutional money that was likely swooping it up and making just monstrous returns. And so the irony is even though I'm not a huge Bitcoin fan, I do still view Bitcoin as an asset that historically will be looked back upon. It's a Ponzi scheme that fooled everyone. That being said, I also recognize it as a huge opportunity, and it has been a life-changing opportunity for me personally, financially speaking. And if it was to fall 95+%, I would be the first person in line saying, I'm going to be buying some Bitcoin. So if anything, I'm rooting for that to happen. But I would also buy Bitcoin if it fell to 35,000. I wouldn't buy, an absurd amount that put me in some kind of strain, but I would certainly be willing to take some risk on and pick up some Bitcoin. At this point, I've sold most of my Bitcoin, not all of it, but I have sold most of it. And I have a very small amount of Bitcoin left that I currently have sell orders sitting on the exchanges at 173,000. Again, that's not financial advice, but that is where my sell orders are sitting at currently. I don't know if it's exact dollar amount, but it's in that ballpark. I set the orders up months ago. So that's where I'm at, guys. I've been pretty quiet. I've been doing a lot of other stuff. Taking a bit of a break. I don't want to go into a big spiel about that. At some point, I'll probably talk about it more. If you're following me on Facebook, you probably already know what I'm talking about. But I have been up to just a personal journey, if you will. Right. So that's what I've been up to. But I wanted to share this video with everybody and say that I haven't disappeared. I'm not going to disappear. I'm still here. And at some point, I hope to be back doing videos on a regular basis again. But for right now, hopefully this will suffice. All right. All that being said, please remember I'm some guy sitting in a spare bedroom, which means that nothing in the video is financial advice. Again, all these predictions are just for fun, nothing else. You should always go out and do your own due diligence and seek out professional financial advice from a licensed financial advisor before making any type of investment in cryptocurrency, the stock market, precious metals, Forex, or any other tradable asset. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up, subscribe to the channel, and as always, please remember to trade safe.